Scott Shepard is a fellow at the National Center, as well as a director of the National Center's Free Enterprise Project. Scott's taught at law schools, worked Wake Forest in North Carolina, Willamette University in Oregon. He's the author of the legal textbook, Wills, Trusts, and Estates in Context. He previously served as policy director with the Yankee Institute in Connecticut and the manager of the Water Law Project at the Pacific Legal Foundation. His experience in government and private practice, he earned his Juris Doctor from the University of Virginia, a master's degree from Vanderbilt, and a Bachelor of Arts from the University of Richmond. I've known Scott for a while. He was one of the very first people to call out the evils of ESG, and he's worked on action plans to combat it. He's part of a coalition that's winning, beating back the trillion-dollar investment managers with common sense and a passion for liberty. Welcome, Scott, back to the Economic War Room.
Thank you so much, Kevin, and I'll try to be more interesting for your viewers than that bio would suggest.
Actually, you're very interesting, but the point is you've got extraordinary credibility. You understand the law and the implications of all of this nonsense that's being foisted on us. That is a critical thing.
Well, I appreciate that, and I don't know that I know all of it, but I've been baffled recently, Kevin, by how much more really clear law I seem to know than pretty much anybody running these giant investment houses or some of the biggest and now dumbest corporations in America.
Yeah, well, part of the reason that they're the dumbest corporations in America is the very problem that we're talking about. Money's been used as a weapon to engage corporations for political ends and purposes, and that's the real threat.
Yeah. Well, I mean, in a real sense, it is, other than perhaps China, as you know perfectly well, it might be the greatest threat to the republic that now exists, because, after all, the two things that they're trying to do, that the ESG mavens are trying to do, is to reintroduce race, sex, and orientation discrimination throughout the United States, business, school, everywhere else, this time with the vectors reversed. So against straights, against white people, against men. But what they do, what all discrimination does, is to force hiring on the basis of irrelevant characteristics rather than on the basis of merit. And we're seeing the disaster of that play out at Boeing and in a more ideological sense at Disney, and then and many other companies. And then the other thing that they're doing is trying to capture and make very expensive, unreliable, and unavailable energy. And I mean, nobody needs to say that twice. Energy is the font of all human life and all life, and certainly all freedom. So it really is an existential threat.
Well, and yet the polling of Americans says they don't want these things. The people vote with their wallets at Bud Light and Disney and elsewhere. They say, we don't want this woke nonsense. But the American people, aren't we the owners of the American corporations? Not in a collective sense, but in an individual sense, through our pension funds, but also through just our individual IRAs, where we own stocks and bonds and index funds and so forth.
Well, that's right. There aren't that many Americans left anymore. This isn't the 20s who don't have a direct interest in the stock market, whether they realize it or not. But you can look for more concrete markers. BlackRock, for instance, stopped offering ESG-specific investment vehicles in, I think, August, in part because they were losing money. BlackRock recognized that ESG investing loses money, and so they shut down those funds. But they continue, and the other ones do as well, to use all of the assets invested with them to push ESG goals, to force behaviors, as Larry Fink accidentally said once, in ways that are just political, ideological, and that, as you say, demonstration after demonstration has illustrated American investors do not want. And so, you know, they're increasingly hiding that fact. We can hope that they're moving away from it, but if they're not, we can expect mountains of litigation to attach to these companies.
But in a very real sense, ultimately the companies are supposed to be owned by their shareholders, and the index fund or the mutual fund is a pass-through. It's an ability to hold it on behalf of someone else. So at the end of the day, who are supposed to be the real owners of these companies?
Well, obviously, I mean, the question is, whose capital is it? If it's a retirement fund, the retirees worked all their lives to save that money. That's their money, and they should get their ideology should decide it. And for investors, it's their capitalism. These investment houses that talk about responsible capitalism, what they're doing is stealing the power of other people's capital in order to push their political policy preferences. That's much closer to the genuine definition of fascism than to any kind of capitalism.
Oh, no question. So bottom line is, why are companies no longer serving their shareholders? Why are they doing these bad things? And you just kind of defined it. Where does this all stem from?
Well, here's my theory. So I don't have this guaranteed in any way, but you'll recall the Zuccotti Park protests of 2010, Occupy Wall Street, Eat the Rich, blah, blah, blah. Well, it seems like right about that time, the self-appointed masters of the universe, the giant corporation heads, decided to cut a deal with the left. Listen, lefties, we'll run our corporations according to your policy preferences, decarbonization, equity-based discrimination, etc. In exchange, you let us keep our billions. You let us be billionaires. You and we can join a global class of nobility, and we together will crush the peons. And I mean, that might not be absolutely true, but that's the script that's played out.
Yeah, well, who's supposed to decide what's good for society? Is it going to be the free market, elected officials, or is it Larry Fink of BlackRock?
I mean, in a republic such as we have, it's obviously up to us, which leads to very few conclusions, except that Larry Fink and the World Economic Forum lunatics are genuinely working toward, with all the gussied up nonsense in front, are genuinely working toward a neo-feudalism.
Yeah, but the law's not on their side, is it? The law is on the side of shareholders, not what they call stakeholders, right?
Yeah, absolutely. And states like Delaware, where a lot of companies are incorporated, are trying to muddy that fact. But you're seeing a lot of companies move away from Delaware, and that'll destroy Delaware, but be a good lesson for everybody else.
Yeah, the bottom line is that Free Enterprise Project, what you're doing is going to make a difference here. We have a serious problem. Scott and his team have come up with a tool that we'll get to in this episode. We have to take a break first, but we're going to talk about how we take the law back, use it, and return free market capitalism to America. We'll be back after a break. In uncertain times, finding stability in the economy can feel challenging. But what if you could navigate economic volatility while honoring your biblical values? At Timothy Plan, they believe this balance is possible. Timothy Plan filters its volatility-weighted ETFs and family of mutual funds through a biblical pro-life and pro-family lens, so you can see competitive returns and moral responsibility, helping you to weather the economic storms. With Timothy Plan, align your investments with your values while adapting to our ever-changing culture. Since 1994, Timothy Plan has been recognized leader in biblically responsible investing. Timothy Plan, your bridge between faith, finances, and the future. Visit timothyplan.com or call 1-800-TIM-PLAN or 1-800-846-7526. Investing includes risk, including possible loss of principal. Before investing, carefully consider a fund's investment objectives, risks, charges, and expenses contained in the prospectus available at timothyplan.com.
Oh, hi, I'm Kevin Freeman, and I'm here to tell you about coffee. Well, not really, but I'm going to use coffee to illustrate my point. Here we have several different coffees, each with its own unique characteristics. First, we have instant coffee. This coffee pretends to be coffee, but it's not really coffee at all. It's a fraud. Plus, it tastes terrible. I'm out. Next, we have woke coffee. Their coffee actually tastes pretty good, until you find out that when you drink it, you have to admit that you've oppressed other coffees in the past. Insanity. I'm out. Next, we have Big Tech Coffee. Now, these guys used to encourage folks to share with others what they thought about their coffee. But now, if you say you don't like Big Tech Coffee, they'll take away your coffee pot. I'm out. This brings us to Patriot Mobile Coffee, right? This is one big cup of truth and freedom. There's no fraud here. Patriot Mobile is America's real Christian conservative wireless provider. Patriot Mobile gives back millions of dollars every year to organizations that are on the front lines fighting for our freedoms. Patriot Mobile offers the best nationwide 4G and 5G coverage on the same networks as the other major carriers. So you'll get the same great coverage along with 100% US-based customer support while knowing you are supporting a company that shares your conservative values. Switch to Patriot Mobile today by visiting patriotmobile.com or call 972-PATRIOT.
We're talking with Scott Shepard, and we're talking about the American corporate system. It served us well for a quarter millennia, really, since the buttonwood tree that created Wall Street that we know today, to very recently, the owners of American corporation were the shareholders, and they controlled it. They're still the owners, but they've lost control. How did this happen, Scott?
Well, part of it was accident, and part of it was design. What happened was, in previous decades and centuries, and this was Alex Hamilton's genius and his evil, the people who owned shares were largely wealthy New Yorkers or wealthy Northeasterners. And the mass of the country had nothing to do with Wall Street. That changed in the 1920s. Everybody got in, but they got in so late that they were burned by the stock market. And unfortunately, Hoover governed like Roosevelt, but it got blamed on the Republicans. And so there we are. Now everybody owns stocks, and they wanted easy ways to get into the stock market. And that turned out to be ETFs and mutual funds. So you don't have to buy individual stocks. You just buy a whole panoply, and you've got risk amelioration. But if you own only fractional parts of a bunch of stocks, you can't vote your own proxies. And the people who issue those ETFs for a very long time just didn't influence companies with the power of those investments in any way. But after Zuccotti Park, after the deal with the devil liberals, the big three investment houses started using other people's capital to force corporations left. And that's the crisis in a nutshell. Well,
define for our viewers who don't understand, what is a proxy? What do you mean proxy? Because like I own shares in a bunch of corporations, and I want the company to understand what my shares stand for, what I want done with them, and so forth, and I vote those shares. What's a proxy vote?
Sure. Every year, a company is required to have an annual general meeting, which is a meeting of shareholders. And for that meeting, they send out a ballot of the things that shareholders are going to be able to vote on that year. And it includes nominations and renominations for directors of the company, and some random things. And then shareholder proposals that have been sent by organizations, including ours or larger shareholders, to try to influence the direction the company's moving in. And so in prior days, if you own 10 shares of AT&T, you could go vote those 10 shares of AT&T. But what's happened if you own 10 shares of an ETF, those ballots go to whoever sponsors the ETF, BlackRock, State Street, Vanguard, and then they get to vote those shares. And that's the mechanism.
Yeah. So with that, I want my investments to vote to maximize the return to the shareholder. That's me. But there's been this whole new concept of stakeholder capitalism, where somehow companies are supposed to represent the interests of everybody, whether they own shares or not. And that to me sounds like socialism on the march to Marxism.
Well, I mean, it's all a con, right? Because as you know, just by watching any election ever, all the people don't agree about anything. And so when they pretend that they're working for all stakeholders by doing some invariably lefty policy thing, what they're actually doing is using whatever stakeholders they picked as sock puppets to do their own personal policy preferences.
Yeah, and that's no question. And when they send out these proxies, you look at them, and I've got a chartered financial analyst designation. I've studied proxies for 40 years of an investing career, and yet they can be very complicated. They can be convoluted. There's double negatives in them sometimes. They're really not simple, plain language, easy to understand. I think the SEC's tried to address it, but there's still, the board tells me, vote for these candidates for the board. They basically suggest themselves to be voted for.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's exactly right. And some of it is convoluted, and the SEC has tried to fix it, but in in the modern era, the Gensler SEC wants there to be as much convolution as possible using woke doublespeak so that investors think they're voting to increase the value of their shares and the efficiency of the company, but they're voting for equity-based discrimination, crippling decarbonization, and just the whole left-wing panoply.
Yeah, and that's for the, quote, stakeholders, which you claim are stock puppets. They don't technically have votes at the moment, just the shareholders do. But if you own an index fund or an exchange-traded fund or any kind of mutual fund, the manager may be voting their interests and not the interest of their actual owners.
That's exactly right.
All right, so the boards are recommending themselves, and there's all these issues that come up, and you fought a good fight on that, bringing up conservative issues to counterbalance the lefty issues. And the point is that we just want the companies within the framework of the laws of the United States, within the framework of good corporate practice and so forth, to maximize the return for the shareholder. I invest in a company so I can get the highest possible return from it. But that's not what everyone thinks, is it?
No. Well, here's what the left and the ESG movement does. It pretends that it's neutral and it's just doing good for everybody, but that's impossible. What it's actually doing is trying to force corporations to adopt the whole government initiatives of the Biden administration, for example. And so they're directly partisan. We, on the other hand, have fought for companies not to take right-wing positions, but just to go back to absolutely neutral, to do their fiduciary duty, to stay out of social and political controversies unless it directly affects their bottom line, so to keep taxes from going up or something, but to stay out of these things. And yet, of course, the left says that we're politicizing when we fight their movement to the left, and that they're neutral when they try to push in that direction. So, it's the same lies that we always get from the left, the same, and you have to do the Pravda read of anything they say, to read backward, to know that anything they're accusing our side of, they're up to it, their necks in.
Well, and they keep it confusing, and so people turn to proxy voting services to help them. Well, what is best for the company? How should I describe the proxy advisors?
Well, so there are two companies, ISS and Glass Lewis, who again pretend po-facedly to be entirely neutral, not to be partisan, but we did an analysis over the summer. They've voted over the past, decade, 60% of the time for left ESG proposals that move companies to the left, 0% of the time for ours or other right-of-center groups, S or E proposals, environmental or social, 60 to 0. So that's a pure partisan batting average.
But that gives political cover. If you're a manager, it's like, well, that was recommended by our proxy advisor, ISS, so it gives them political cover. What happened to the fiduciary standard where I'm here to serve the actual owners of the company?
Yeah, that's disappeared, and it's still in the law, and I think we're going to see a lot of enforcement of it once a win or two gets chalked up.
Yeah, we need to take another break. When we come back, let's talk about your new Proxy Navigator tool and how that can really change the game for American investors. We'll be right back. Here's a $10 bill. It's got the picture of Alexander Hamilton on the front of it. It's kind of sad. When I was 10 years old, everything that I could buy for $1 now costs about $10. That's the cost of inflation. It's just paper. It's not backed by anything. You can't exchange it for gold and silver. You used to, but you can't do that anymore. And that's unfortunate. Pirates wouldn't accept this. Pirates, they wanted gold and silver. Patriots, the founders of this nation, also wanted gold and silver coin. In fact, they put a provision in the Constitution, 17 words, that said states could only make gold and silver coins tender within the states. That's why I wrote this new book, Pirate Money, Discovering the Founders' Hidden Plan for Economic Justice and Defeating the Great Reset. It will explain exactly the history of money and exactly why gold and silver coins can be made modern with new technology and a useful monetary system. PirateMoneyBook.com. We're speaking with Scott Shepard of the National Center. We're talking about corporate proposals, proxy votes, and we mentioned ESG, environment, social, governance. Scott, describe what the G is in ESG.
The G is, as you say, governance. It's supposed to be about just corporations running well efficiently for the best the best advantage of their owners, which is to say the shareholders.
So what you're doing is actually working with your Proxy Navigator tool, which we'll explain in a second, but you're actually working something that's positive for governance. It could be considered a pro-ESG, in a fair sense, proposal.
Well, I mean, look, if you analyze it honestly, we're not just good for governance, we're good for the E and the S too. Because for the S, does any honest person think that reintroducing race, sex, and orientation discrimination throughout the American culture is going to be good for social development or good for the people supposedly benefited by it? And likewise, the absolute purest truth about environmental protection is that the richer a country gets, the more completely it protects its environment. So what we need for that is affordable, reliable, as clean as possible energy. As we move forward, the country will get cleaner and the world will get cleaner. But instead, these idiots want to put us on unreliable, expensive energy, which, by the way, isn't any cleaner and has all the same problems or more, because just getting cobalt out of the Congo involves slave and forced labor out the well. Finish that yourself. But yeah, we're on the side of G and E and S.
Yeah, so this is actually good for America, what you're doing, and you're giving people an opportunity to vote their shares and investment managers to vote their shares in a way that's good, actually, really, truly for ESG, but more importantly, is good for American shareholders. So describe what the Proxy Navigator is, how you created it, and how people can use it.
Thank you, Kevin. I appreciate this because we put together an app, or it's a web browser tool as well, called Proxy Navigator. And all year it'll offer all sorts of information about these companies. So if you want to know who's woke, who's left, according to the 1792 exchange, to the Viewpoint Diversity Index, to Red Balloon, and we're going to be adding others, you can see their analyses right there on the app. But perhaps most importantly, as shareholder season starts, you can use that app, use your control numbers from your proxy ballots, and so can your investment advisors and others, to vote your shares held directly to a company, not in an ETF. You can vote those shares in favor of your policy preferences. And if you're on our side of the bench, we provide recommendations how to vote. This year, it'll be about 80 to 100 of the biggest companies where most of the shareholder proposals go. Next year, we hope to cover the whole S&P 500.
Wow, that's a huge thing. So when you get these complicated pieces of paper coming in from Morgan Stanley or from Merrill Lynch or whatever your broker-dealer is, and they've got these votes, and you go and vote electronically, and you don't know how to vote, you can turn right now for 80, I'm presuming, of the largest American companies, 80 to 100, and you can see what the proposal's really about, and then you can see recommendations on how to vote regarding it. Is that right?
Yeah, that's exactly right. You can see our recommendation categories if you want to trust us and automate to not think about it again and always go with our recommendations, or down to individualize. We explain our vote on every single recommendation we make, so you can decide on that basis as well.
Well, I can imagine a lot of people don't vote their own proxies. I've been an investment advisor for years. My firm has voted the shares of our underlying clients. This is a great tool for investment managers, for registered investment advisors, for ETF managers, and so forth.
Well, obviously, I agree completely. And if any of your viewers happen to know anybody in that position, if they'd pass the information along, we'd be greatly obliged.
Well, like we do with all our shows, we'll put this in an economic battle plan, so that we'll send it to all the people who signed up for a free economic battle plan, so they can just go right to it. But what does it cost?
Not a thing. Not a thing. There might eventually be some charges for big organizations, so we can provide it free to smaller users forever, but that is absolutely our goal.
Starting point now, I downloaded it on my iPhone. I'm sure it's available in the Android store as well, and you can go online, which I did as well. I went online and I looked it up. This is an amazing tool. It's something people can use right now to help them weaponize their money. We believe in liberty, security, and values rather than the woke's version of ESG, LSV.
That's exactly right. Couldn't agree with you more. And if you go today, We've got the big thing on the horizon is the Disney meeting. That should be quite exciting, and in a whole number of ways. We've got our recommendations up for that, and meetings are starting soon, so you're going to see a flood of new recommendations. Even if we have to do them at 2 a.m., you're going to see a flood of recommendations go up soon.
Yeah, no, this is a passion project for you. I know the National Center's been doing this for years. I know that this is, out of this has spawned investment managers who are now focused, like Strive, they're focused on liberty, security, values type investing. I know Timothy Plan, which is a sponsor of this show, has looked at your Proxy Navigator and worked with Art Alley on that. This is an amazing tool. What impact do you think you're going to have with this?
Well, I think most importantly, we're going to give smaller investors the chance to have their voice heard and to pull it back from the large companies. But we're also going to illustrate that all of the claims that everybody agrees with these left-wing propositions are false. That it'll help us to push BlackRock and State Street and Vanguard and the advisory services to drop their partisanship. And if that doesn't work, there might be some lawsuits behind it. But we're going to give center-right Americans a voice with their shares, and we're going to be able to build pressure to knock off this attempt to seize the controls of the Republicans effectively to destroy it.
And we're seeing a pushback across the board. We're seeing the State Financial Officers Foundation with the state treasurers. We're seeing the 1792 Project, as you mentioned, our good friend Paul Fitzpatrick and others. They're really doing hard work on this. This is a tool that's going to be used by the entire movement, I predict. Where Mississippi is suing BlackRock for fraud, it's going to emanate from things like you're doing. Where can people learn more?
Fingers crossed. We're at nationalcenter.org or freeenterpriseproject.org. The Proxy Navigator is downloadable on the App Store, the Apple App Store, and whatever the Samsung App Store is called. And the webpage is, I think, proxynavigator.org, but I'll double check that.
We'll put it all in the economic battle plan so it's easy. So, Scott, please come visit us at Liberty Hawk Ranch. We pull great minds like yours together here all the time. You can learn more about Scott and the Free Enterprise Project at nationalcenter.org. Now, we're going to summarize all of this in our free economic battle plan. You can get your free copy at economicwarroom.com. Remember, what we see as a marketplace, our enemies view as a battle space. This is Kevin Freeman from the Economic War Room.